What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, along with the Z-Man from Mtg. We like that magic stuff, and it is currently day 5 of a brand new standard environment. That's been fun so far. I've been liking it. Ziggy's been liking it by and large. He complains about rogues sometimes, but I think, personally, we got ourselves a pretty good format. For the time being, that is, at least. I'm sure eventually someone will remember that Embercleave exists and Ugin exists, and there are some really powerful decks and cards in this environment. But if you want to talk about those decks and cards, maybe check out this video over here that Ziggy's pointing to. We did that the other day. That was a good video. Of course, I made it, so I'm biased, but I think it was pretty decent. But today, we're going to take it one step spicier and talk about 10 cards that I don't think are receiving near enough attention in the new standard. But quick reminder to like and subscribe for more cat content, mostly. Who cares about Magic? You're all here for this fat boy, and not necessarily this fat boy. Although I know some of you come for both of us, but also some of you come as well to talk about Magic cards. So why don't we maybe do that? Where are you going, buddy? Apparently he was just going right there. But anyway, you can also watch me play Magic on Twitch and support us on Patreon right there. But I think I'm done now, so let's talk about the magical cards. Now, starting off, we got to do an honorable mention. That's how I always do my list. So number HM, I guess. There's no number attached to it. Honorable mention for this one is Angel of Destiny. Now, full disclosure, my honorable mention was going to be Feasting Troll King, but it turns out people are doing stuff with that card in the last couple of days, so not really much of a, I guess, sleeper, whatever we're calling this list. 10 cards to brew with, right? I guess people have already done that, so I'm not I talk too much about Feasting Troll King, but I've been amazed that I haven't seen more Angel of Destiny. I've seen people talk about it on Twitter every now and again, like, oh, my Angel of Destiny deck's looking pretty good, but I haven't actually come up against an Angel of Destiny deck on the ladder or even an unranked yet on Arena since the bans, which, again, kind of surprises me. It looks like a pretty decent time for a card like this. Now, I've seen these life gain decks try to leverage every tool in their toolbox into a potential late game engine. Things like Speaker of the Heavens or Heliod, or even things like Veto and Griffinary. You see turned into late game engines some of the time, but why not just play a card that kills them? Rather than gain advantage over 2 or 3 turns and snowball into a victory that way and keep letting your opponent go, why don't you just kill them? Why don't you just play a card that says you win the game on it? It seems pretty decent for these decks right now, and again, it's just weird that you don't see it flying around more often. I do have some pretty obvious gripes with Angel, but I'll get into those as I talk about the number 10 card on the list, which is another 5-drop creature, but this one I think is immensely more powerful, and that's Ashaya. Again, a little confused as to why I haven't seen people trying to break this in the first week of the new standard. It looks like it's just begging to be broken, and I've talked before about how this reminds me of Nissa Who Shakes the World a little bit. If you can actually untap the turn after you play this with this and some creatures in play, then you can effectively double your mana and play just about any card you could hope to put into your deck. Looks especially fun with things like Nyx Bloom Ancient to, again, just make all of the mana in the world. But if that weren't enough, Ashaya is always going to be a huge thing, too. And it makes it so where you play creatures, they trigger landfall. There's so many really cool things about this card, and it's very easy to play on turn 3 in a Gilded Goose-supported format. So, again, just a little weirded out that I don't see more decks specifically built around Ashaya and what this can do for you, whether it's making mana or just getting through for all the damage in the world. One way or the other, we should probably be seeing more Ashaya decks. Why aren't we? I'm like a good lawyer, though. I'm only going to ask a question I already know the answer to, and the answer to that last question is fairly obvious. These creatures don't see a lot of play because they're 5-drop dudes that don't do a whole lot when they enter the battlefield. You can make the case that Ashaya can do something when it ETBs, but it's still just not enough a lot of the time in a world full of Heartless Axe at instant speed and Kicked Bloodchief's Thirst that can take out literally anything that you play. Also, Hagra Mauling and a bunch of other really heavily played removal spells can invalidate some of these 5-drops right now, and if that were enough, you got a bunch of people playing counter magic, from rogues to the various control decks people are experimenting with right now. So it can be hard to resolve, let alone keep a big creature on the board right now. But number 9 is the answer to that equation, and that's Cragplate Behemoth. It might finally be time to crack out the replacement for Carnage Tyrant. Obviously, the trade-off here is that the card is outrageously expensive. It's the most expensive card on the list in terms of CMC. I'm not talking about American dollars. This card is actually fairly cheap to buy, but, there's also the fact that there are going to be some decks you want to play this against, but they just end you before you're able to actually cast the spell, so there's that to consider. But, there's also the fact that there's a whole bunch of effective ramp in the format right now, and you can reanimate this too, but if you hard cast it, it can't be countered, which takes care of a whole bunch of problems right there. First things first, this will always make it past the stack which is something that you should bring up in this day and age with so many rogues decks, counterspell decks, and all that, control decks. So there's that to consider, and once it's on the table, it can't be hit by all these removal spells that people are leaning way too heavily on right now. I've already mentioned them all in the video, but they do zilch against this thing once it's on the table. Decks like Rogues do have answers to it. They can fly over with a Rankle, make you sack it if it's your only dude. They can block it with a Nighthawk Scavenger that has Death Touch, or Thieves Guild Enforcer. So there are some answers to a creature like this, but none of those answers are counterspells or removal, which are some of the most important cards in the format right now. So I'm considering cracking out old Craig. But my number 8 is another creature, I'm sorry to report, but I mean, have you seen how good they're making creatures nowadays? Number 8 is Grakmaw, a card that a lot of people were super excited about when it first got spoiled, so I'm a little dumbstruck that I haven't seen more copies of it across the table from me in the last 4 or 5 days. This does have some natural enemies right now, exile effects like Scorching Dragonfire and Elspeth Conquers Death, plus things like Heartless Act, which, as long as it only has the 3 counters it came with on it, can take those 3 counters off, and then it doesn't leave behind a creature because it didn't have any counters on it, which is pretty terrible, but still, 2 out of the 3 cards in that example can't kill it if it has even 1 counter on it, and 2 out of the 3 cards in that example don't really see too much play. So, the natural enemies this does have are sometimes not even that good against it, for the most part. So, again, more people should be trying this out, especially considering it's easy to put extra counters on it, whether you're an Abzan counters, or even just a green-black counters deck that does exist in this environment. It's fairly easy to make this into a 5/5 or a 6/6, and even if your opponent can deal with it, it still leaves behind a 6/6. Trades with a creature in combat, leaves behind like a 4/4 or something. Trades with a removal spell effectively. If your opponent does have like a Blood Chief's Thirst to kick it or something, and actually kill your Grakmaw, it's still going to leave behind something just as big as was previously there, and that kind of value wasn't unfair enough like a week ago, right? Because there were cards that were way more unfair than this. But now this kind of value is, I think, back to being good in the current standard. You know, the way we used to evaluate cards, this card looked really, really good. But it turns out the cards are so good today, this card was not good. But we may have just banned all the cards so broken that they invalidate the brokenness of this card. So I think it's probably worth taking a look at again. Number 7 isn't a creature, so that's refreshing. Have some Nyx Lotus, everybody. Remember that this card exists, and there's some really cool stuff you can do with it right now. Like, I'm a little sus on playing it in a world full of counterspells, first of all, and Gem Razors, probably the bigger concern. A lot of people are playing Gem Razor right now, so this might not be entirely safe, but it's at least fun and awesome, and there are a ton of really cool Nyx Lotus decks, from lesser known stuff like the Mono White Reverent Hoplite Nyx Lotus deck, all the way to probably the most well-known iteration of Nyx Lotus, and that's the Mono Blue deck, that looks to just cast like a huge Gadwick and finish you with either a Thassa's Oracle or a Teferi's Tutelage, their choice, doesn't matter. But that deck is really fun, reliably wins on turn 5, is awesome to pilot, and we're in kind of a mid-rangey format, or at least a format that's a little bit more conducive to mid-range than it was a week or so ago, or really more so than it's been in the last year. So, you know, if we can finally play some mid-range decks in this format again, a deck like this that can reliably get to turn 5 and actually cinch the game up looks pretty good to me, right? Opponents might have Gem Razors and all, but opponents can have answers and we can still win. That's just called fair magic. I'm okay with fair magic, and I'm even more okay with, you know, casting almost every card in my deck in one turn, untapping Nyx Lotus with Corridor Monitor 2-3 times, casting a Gadwick that draws me 40 cards, and just winning off of Oracle. That's fun magic in my book. So again, I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen more people dredging this deck up. Not to mention that we just got all these MDFCs, you know, like the Bolt ones that all cost like 1,000,000 mana to cast the spell half of, you know, Amiria's Call and Seagate Restoration, blah, blah, blah. They cost like 7 mana to cast. Nyx Lotus can help you cast those. I don't know, just thinking out loud. But anyway, let's move on to number 6, speaking of artifacts. Shimmer Dragon. Now, I like this even more than a card like Cragblade Behemoth right now, because it's a little bit cheaper to get down, and it actually has a form of evasion, which is a lot better than a card like Cragblade Behemoth, which can be blocked by like Mire Tritons and Thieves Guild Enforcers and stuff, and just taken care of. Whereas Shimmer Dragon, not that easy. Now, you do have to turn it on by having artifacts out, but there are plenty of playable artifacts in this format. Matter of fact, there's an all-colorless deck right now that plays mostly artifacts, and it's actually like a tier 2 deck. Deck's not bad, so it's already been proven you can play artifacts to some decent effect, and I think these decks should slip in a few copies of Shimmer Dragon because it's a really potent finisher right now, against which, again, a lot of this targeted removal just does literally nothing. It's hopeless. But my number 5 is, you guessed it, another 6-drop creature. The card types vary a lot more from here on out in the list, and the creatures get less expensive too, so yay. But we got one more 6-drop I want to talk about, because if there's one 6-drop in the format that I want to play, it's Garuda. Feasting Troll King or not, Garuda is the most interesting 6-drop to me right now. Remember that this card is a thing? Remember that for the first week after Ikoria came out, especially after the early access event, everyone was like, dude, we're going to have to ban Garuda, it's too much. And now, no one cares. No one's tried Garuda at all. Turned out Garuda was kind of bad. But again, Magic just got way more fair, and Garuda's kind of not fair. You don't have Spark Double anymore to copy this. But you do still have Thassa to blink it. You've got Charming Prince to blink it. Right? So you can still do plenty of stuff in Bant Garuda, and there are lots of even casting costed creatures that you might want to play in that deck, like Dream Trawler is a good example. So why aren't we playing Garuda? Why are we at least trying this card? Again, the card is demonstrably unfair. You can do some really sick, disgusting things with Garuda. A Garuda, not a Daruda. There's no such card as Daruda. But Garuda can do some dumb stuff. Plus, bonus here, Demon Kraken. Maybe the best combination of creature types in all of Magic. So it's got that going for it too. But mostly, I want to get 12 mana worth of value for my 6 mana investment. And Garuda does that pretty well. Even after they changed the companion rule, I still think this is a playable card. Now, my number 4 was almost Whirlwind of Thought, but as usual, after I had that thought, I remembered Song of Creation existed. I just think it's just a much more tempting and attractive card than Whirlwind, but I guess Whirlwind gets the honorable mention for this spot. You can play with that card too, it looks pretty dumb, but this card is awesome. This card is so good. I just can't get enough of Song of Creation. I can't say no one's playing with this card because I certainly am. On stream the other night, we played Song of Creation Ruin Crab, and although it didn't look great in a pre-ban world, it was still a really, really fun deck to play that can do some really dumb stuff once it's actually set up. You get your Teferi's Tutelage out, then you get your Song of Creation out, and then every spell you cast can draw you into more spells to cast. They're all 4 mills a piece or whatever. You get another Tutelage out, then you're really rocking and rolling. It's a dumb card just in the mill deck, but there's plenty of stuff you can do with this. It's awesome with adventure creatures because you can effectively get 4 cards off of 1 card, cast the adventure half, then cast the creature. That's effectively 4 cards out of 1 card. See how that math worked out? Plus, you can always play in the adventure half of a creature and then kind of bank it in the exile zone, and then you don't have to discard. You get around the discard clause on the last part of this card, the thing that's supposed to be the downside. Yeah, adventure creatures effectively just don't care about that downside, so it works really well with them too. There's a lot of cool stuff you could do with Song of Creation right now, especially considering, again, we've got MDFCs. Let me bring those up one more time. But I think that there are effectively decks that are possible to play in this environment right now that have more or less 0 actual lands in them. Right? I think there are kind of 0 land, nothing but MDFCs as land decks. And MDFCs are really good with this too, because sometimes when you have a song out, you just discarded your hand last turn, so you're basically in top deck mode all the time. If you draw a land, you don't get to do anything that turn. MDFC solved that problem, right? So you're almost never going to actually draw a land if you built your deck correctly with Song of Creation in it. So I think there's just so many different reasons to play the Song of Creation deck that my spidey sense is really tingling with this guy right here. I just think it's the perfect time to make Song of Creation work, considering how many things we have in the format that work so well with it. But here we are, top 3, ladies and gentlemen. My number 3 is Vadrok. This card looks so stinking good to me right now, y'all. First of all, and very importantly, I'm just looking, just in terms of the creature. Let's not even look at what happens when you mutate it, all right? Let's just look at a 3-mana, 3/3 flying First Strike that in this format can take down Rankles in the air with First Strike, as well as Nighthawk Scavengers in the air with First Strike. And pretty much every other flying creature in the Rogues deck. This can block, kill, and not even break a sweat. First Strike is amazing. A 3-power First Striker in the air is unbelievable in this format for some really techie reasons that I wanted to bring up. But now on to the mutate portion. Yeah, this is going to cost a lot of different colors, but boy, do we have some good removal spells in this format right now. I've already brought up Heartless Act and Blood Chief's Thirst and whatnot, but being able to recast them out of the graveyard would be super dope. But there's also tons of like good red removal spells, blue card draw spells right now. There's just lots of stuff that you might want to cast out of the graveyard with the Vadrock. So you have that ability, but mostly what I like on this card right now is the body. The body does so much in this format while still being able to, if it doesn't have to block, it can attack really well too. Relatively early in the game, just the stats for the mana cost plus the keyword abilities is a great deal. So that's mostly why I'm interested in Vadrock, because I think it does some interesting things in the environment right now, just with what the situation in the skies is looking like. A lot of important creatures have 3 toughness that fly right now. So, Soaring Thought Thief is another good example. So, all of them are terrible against Vadrock. So, keep Vadrock in mind. But, in some ways, the mutate is just gravy. If you are able to mutate this and play a removal spell out of your yard and kill one of those Rankles, kill one of those Scavengers with like a Scorching Dragonfire or something, all the better. Vadrock just looks unbelievable right now. But number 2 is a card that I gotta admit it's kind of a pet card for me lately, but that just means that I've done a lot of testing with this card, and I can attest. See what I did there? The card is actually really just crazy, and that's Lol Mage's Domination. I wanted to shine kind of a special spotlight on this card in this video, and it took all I had not to make it my number 1 card. But there is a card I think is more interesting than this. Because honestly, this card is not really like a build around. It's not a brew around card or anything. It's just a card that I have personally witnessed being incredible on multiple occasions. And I don't think enough people are on this card right now. I don't think I'd play it in Rogues or anything, outside of the sideboard at least. But in a lot of these mono blue or blue black or blue red mill decks that we see, especially the mono blue deck that doesn't have a whole lot of other good removal pieces, Lol Mage's Domination is just off the charts good. I really cannot. If there's anything you take away from this video, it's that you should test with Lol Mage's Domination. All of your mill decks and all of your Teferi's Tutelage decks, your Ruin Crab decks, and even your Rogues deck, I honestly think you should at least test Lol Mage's Domination, because this card has just been crazy for me. That's no Agent of Treachery or anything, but in some cases it's better than Agent of Treachery because it costs way, way less, and you don't care that you don't get an extra body. What you do care about is that you're paying 3 mana to steal any 3-drop in the format once your opponent has 8 things in their yard. You're paying 5 mana to steal any 5-drop in the format. It's effectively like a bribery. But again, in some cases, a little bit better than bribery. Like, the card is just unbelievable, and I don't know how better to get across to you, or that to you, than just scream about it for 3 minutes straight. The card is good. Try Lol Mage's Domination. I will be crazy. I will go absolutely off my rocker if this card eventually rotates and never sees any play whatsoever, because I promise you, this card is good. But anyway, let's leave Domination behind and talk about the number 1 card of the video. What is the most interesting thing to my mind to brew your decks around at the moment? What is positioned well enough and forgotten enough that it can make number 1 on this list? Easy peasy, not even close. Huge degree in my mind of separation between this card and a lot of the other cards on this list. It's Underworld Breach, baby. Life's a Breach, and this card looks especially sandy right now. Now, there are 2 major events that make me want to play this card the most right now. The first of which is kind of old news, right? Euro got banned. That happened a couple of weeks ago, but ever since Euro got banned, we've seen a lot fewer main deck slots dedicated to controlling the opponent's graveyard. Right? There was once upon a time where we'd even see like main deck cling to dust on occasion to make sure the opponent doesn't have important cards in their yard they can reutilize. Well, now that Euro's gone, people have kind of deprioritized that, meaning that there's not going to be as many like Tormod's Crypt and Soul Guide Lantern and all of these cards that you could completely decimate our graveyard, meaning that Underworld Breach is a little bit more playable, at least around the edges, than it once was. At the same time, there's a lot more mill decks in the current environment, whether they're Rogues decks that just incidentally mill you, or Ruin Crab, Teferi's Tutelage decks, whatever, like decks that their entire game plan is to mill you out. And Underworld Breach is obviously going to be really, really good in an environment where the opponent mills you out, but just leaves those cards in your graveyard for you to play with. So again, just based on those two factors, I think Breach is a much better card than it has been the entire time, than it's been in Standard. But there's obviously plenty of stuff that you want to play out of your graveyard for relatively cheap, so you get the biggest Breach turn possible as well. Plus, if you play things out of your graveyard, like the Adventure half of a Bone Crusher Giant, that puts the Crusher into exile, so if you play Adventure creatures like Borrower, for instance, they can be really good with Breach as well. So there's just so many like cool ideas floating around with Underworld Breach, whether it's Burn or Adventures or Breach Mill. That's a deck, if you haven't seen it yet, that's kind of going around, sort of hush-hush secret. So there's some things, right? Some decks will play like a 1 or 2 of Underworld Breach and Is It Spells, but it's not something you see very often. But, nowadays where there's a lot more mill in the format and a lot fewer ways to control the opponent's yard, then a card like Underworld Breach is poised for just this huge, breakout. But that's my entire list for now, at least. Originally, I wanted to make this a top 20 list. But in the end, I decided keep it tight. Top 10 is probably for the best. But there were a lot of cards I looked at for this list. So if there was something you wanted to see when you clicked on the video but didn't make the list, or, even if you just want to talk about the things I did put on the list, get at me down there in the comments section. Because if there's a card that you wanted to see that I didn't include, chances are I thought about it. So we can have that conversation down there. But aside from that, just do all the stuff I reminded you to do at the beginning of the video. You didn't get a chance to do it back there. Now's your chance, kid. Just click the thumbs up button down there. Or subscribe to the channel if you wanted to. If you haven't done that yet, it would mean a lot to me. We're trying to get to 120,000 subscribers right now. I think it's about time we did that. So even if you're the kind of person that doesn't sub to YouTube channels, just click it one time. Just once. Do it for you, dude. That would mean a lot to me. But aside from that, if you want to support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/SBMTG or hit the link in the description. $1 a month to vote on what content we do around here. Aside from that, you can check out these cards on TCG Player. I'll leave a link in the description for that. If you order cards through the link I provide, it helps your dude out. That's a good way to help me as well. But aside from that, I'm pretty much done. I guess you can watch me play Magic on Twitch at this web address. That's where I play Magic. But aside from that, I'm so bad at self-promotion. Because I'm a normal person, I hate doing self-promotion. It's just a thing I hate to do. So, if you guys hate this part of the video, just know that I also hate this part of the video. But I'm pretty sure I'm done for this one. So let me know how you felt about it down there in the sideboard, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.